こんばんは。多分と入ってそうです。
レスティアテスト。
はい。こんばんは。
A lot of stuff I can do for styles of these different links, but for now I'm just going to leave that till later because it's kind of boring compared to some of the more interesting stuff like actually getting the Twitter clone to work. One thing I did miss though, if we go into our app here, there's one additional style that we should add on to this div right here just to add some spacing on the right. So we'll say small PR4. That's going to add some
別に動かしながらでもいいか。でしょ。ほら。字面が違うんだ。
padding on the right.
別になんかちょっと待って。えぐい。
Whenever it's a small screen or larger. So if I zoom out to a more normal screen size here, I shrink this down, you're going to notice that our sidebar over here for our border, there's just a little bit of padding on the side. It just looks a little bit better to actually be able to see that border, but obviously on a smaller screen or when I'm super zoomed in like
どこをやらかしたの
this. Obviously we don't need that. That's why I made sure that this only shows up on those smaller or on the larger screen. Sorry. So now what we can do is we can go to this index page here and actually implement this bulk section in the middle. Because on Twitter, we have a few different things we want to do. We want to be able to create some tweets as well as display all the tweets at the bottom. So let's go ahead and get started by just creating a header. So first I'm going to do some empty tags here because we're going to have multiple things we want to return, with the first one being our header. And this header is going to have a bunch of classes applied to it. So we want this to be sticky as well at the top, so top 0. And we want to make sure it shows up above everything. So we'll give it a z index of 10. Also, we're going to give it some border on the bottom because everything in Twitter has all these borders around it. We're going to make sure the background is white, and we're going to add some padding on the top of it as well. And inside of the header is where we can actually put our header, which will go inside of an H1. It'll just say home. Now all we need to do is add some class names to that as well. So we'll say margin bottom is 2 to give it a little space. The X is going to be 4, again, spacing things out. We'll make the text a little bit larger, and we're going to make it bold. So now you can see it says home right there, and if our page scrolled, you'll see that this will follow our page down as we go. So that's really what we need to do for our header section. So now we can move on to the section for our new tweet form. I'm actually going to create a custom component for this, just like that, so we can use this anywhere we want. So this is going to be for creating a brand new tweet. We'll put it right inside of here, new tweet form.tsx. There we go. Export function, new tweet form. And inside of this page, we can just do a quick import on that. There we go. So now if we just make sure that this actually returns something, it'll now say new, just like that. So inside of this new tweet form, let's just go ahead and get some of our JSX in place before we start focusing on a bunch of logic. First of all, we're going to have our form, which is going to have a bunch of classes on it as per usual. So we're going to come in here and say we have flex, and we want this to be a column-based flex layout. Our gap is going to be 2, and we're going to have some border on the bottom, as well as some similar spacing of px4 and py2. If I just put some text inside of here, you can see that now we have that spacing as well as that border. And the next thing I want to do inside of here is I want to create a div that's going to be essentially a row for our form. This is going to contain where our text information is going to go, as well as our profile image. Then below that, we're going to have an actual button for whatever we want. So this is going to be a button down here.
With the music coming.
And then this right here is going to be where we actually put our text area. So the first thing I want to do is style out our text area. We're going to give this a class name again of flex, because I do everything pretty much with flexbox, and we'll say it'll have a gap of 4. And that's because there'll be 2 things. There's going to be a profile image, which I'm actually going to create a custom component for, because we're going to use that literally everywhere. And it's going to take in a source, which is whatever our user, URL is. For now, we'll just say URL, doesn't matter, whatever it is. And then we're going to have our text area. And this is actually going to be where we input all of our information for our actual code. So if we just comment out profile image for now and save, you can see we have a text area and we have our button down here. So that is working. Now for our text area, we can give it some styles. So we can say our class name here is going to be flex grow. We want it to be able to not be resized. So we'll say resize none, because we're going to handle that automatically. We're going to make sure our overflow is hidden. That'll help us with that automatic resizing. And then we're going to give it some padding, as well as make the text inside of here a little bit larger and remove any outline that is on it. Now, if we give that a quick save, you'll notice it's essentially invisible, and even when I click on it, it's invisible. But that's how the actual Twitter one is. It's kind of weird, but that's how it works. works, but you can see as we enter some text inside of here, it's limited to its specific size, but obviously we can make it bigger or smaller automatically inside the code. Also, I'm going to give this a placeholder, and inside of Twitter, there's says what's happening. So that is what we're going to put inside of ours as well. So now if we give this a refresh, you can see we have that text and we can click inside of there. Now the next thing I want to work on is our button, and I'm actually going to use a custom component for this. So let's create a brand new component called button.tsx, because pretty much all of our buttons are going to follow a similar works, but you can see as we enter some text inside of here, it's limited to its specific size, but obviously we can make it bigger or smaller automatically inside the code. Also, I'm going to give this a placeholder, and inside of Twitter, there's says what's happening. So that is what we're going to put inside of ours as well. So now if we give this a refresh, you can see we have that text and we can click inside of there. Now the next thing I want to work on is our button, and I'm actually going to use a custom component for this. So let's create a brand new component called button.tsx, because pretty much all of our buttons are going to follow a similar layout inside of our code. So we'll export that function. Here we'll just return a button just like that. Come into here and we'll make sure that we import that. Whoops, button, there we go. Import that, perfect. And this is just going to say tweet. There we go, I think that's what it says on Twitter. And now we can go over to our button and we can get all of the different props that we want from it. So for this button, we know that we have a few props that we want to add that are custom, as well as a bunch of other props which are going to be button specific. So here, I can put all of our button specific props just like that, and then we can follow it up with our custom props that we need. For example, I'm going to have a prop called small, as well as gray, to determine if this button is a grayscale and if it's going to be large or small. Also, I want to add the ability to pass in custom class names as well. There we go. So now let's actually create the type for our button props. There we go, and we're going to set this to that button props. If we save this real quick, we know that small here is going to be a Boolean. We know that gray is also a Boolean. And we also know that class name is going to be an optional string, and technically all of these properties are optional. So this is optional, and they have default values of false. You don't need to explicitly put them, but I kind of like to. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure that this has the same properties as a button inside of React. If I hover over this button, you can see right here exactly what those props are. So I'm just going to copy this, and I can just say right here, ampersand that. Now if I just make sure I import everything properly, add that import, and we're going to add that import.
リンリン久々。
あ、久しぶりです。リンさん久しぶりですね。でもだいぶ久しぶりですね。何年くらいですか。EO6 楽しんでますか？
in, and if we add that last angle bracket in, and we give this a save, make sure we import only the types from this, now we actually have it so that the props are being properly imported, which means inside of this new tweet, I can set any normal prop that I could set on a button. For example, I could set an on-click property if I wanted.
リンリ
Now
ン
to
マイク
style
ノイ
out
キャ
our
ンかな
button,
んか
we
聞
need
いてか知らんけどあんまり聞こえにくいぞい。リンリン
聞こえますか
256はアンインストールしました。
アンインストールしました。いや、ちょっとマイクが悪くて、マイクがゴミなんですよ。ノイキャンもあるんですけど、そもそも音量がやばいのと、マイクの音量が小さすぎて、多分聞こえないと思います。BO6 アンインストールしちゃったんですね。いや、なんか何年ぶりだろうなって思う。こう、本当に久しぶりだなと思った。
to do quite a few things. So we need to create some different classes. So I'm going to have some classes that are based on size. So we'll say size classes is equal to, and if we are small, we're going to have certain classes which are going to be
リンリン
px2
200円の
and
マイクでも使ってんのか。
マジでゴミマイクですね。ちょっと前使ってたやつね、探さないといけないんです。1200円ぐらいのやつです。今使えるので、ソニーのやつ、なんか2、3000円ぐらいのスタンドマイク。
1. And if we are large,
スタンドできないんで、使えないんですよ。スタンドがなくて、手に持てばいいんです。手が空いてないんで、使えないことになって。
リンリンあれかわらわら。
なんか、マジで安物の2、3000。あれだとまだマシなんですけどね。それよりひどいので。あれもね、安いんで、音質ゴミっちゃゴミです。マイクの品質悪いと、声がだいたい一緒になっちゃうんで、変換されちゃうんで。
リンリンダイナミックマイクはもっと口近づけないと。
ダイナミックマイク。指向性はなんか、そう、周りを拾わないから。本当に、マイクに向かって喋らないといけないんです。ヘッドホンについてるマイクとかは、だいたい、そもそも近いから拾えてるんです。逆になんか拾いすぎたりすると困ったりしますけど。
button, I am instead going to have px4, and we're going to be py2, and I'm also going to change my font to bold.
あんまりマイクに金かけたくないなって思っちゃうんですけど、そうこうしてたら、マジで音質ゴミだから、まともに会話できない。
button, we just have less padding. Now for our gray classes, these are going to be our color classes. Here we're going to check to see if we are currently gray. If we are gray, then we want all of our
ヘッドホンのマイクって大体俺壊しちゃうんで、すぐ壊れちゃうんですよね。多分ね、配線のとこが
電
接触悪くなった。
源ヘッドセットのでいいんちゃう。
ヘッドセットのマイク端子のやつだったら音量いいというか、音量が大きいんで比較的いいんでしょうけど。
Backgrounds to be gray. So we're going to have a background gray of 400. Our text here will be white, and actually it'll be white no matter what, so we can leave that off.
壊れてる
Our
し、
hover
しかな
for
く
the
て。
background, we'll change it to a slight.
あとUSB のヘッドセット。あれマジで音量が小さすぎてゴミなんで、さすがに使えないんですよ。本当に最初の頃使ってました。USB。
Slightly lighter gray. And if the focus is visible for tab accessibility, we're going to set it to the same gray 300. There we go. Now I want to essentially do the exact same thing, but I want to change these colors.
なるほど。
そうですね。なんで、いやまあ普通に探せばあるんですけど、探せなくて、探す時間取れなくて探してないだけだ。まあ探せばあるって感じです。今も前ほど配信とかなんか VC とか
Blue, so we're going to here have a
まずで
blue,
きない。
and this one's going to be a blue 500. This one is going to be a
まあ
blue
一旦いいかなぐらい。
and this one is going to be a blue 400 as well. So depending on if we're gray or not gray, we're going to have gray or blue styles. Then on our button, we can actually have our classes, and the classes are going to be essentially all of our normal classes plus these custom ones that depend on all of our different styles. So we want it to be rounded as a pill shape, so we'll say rounded full. We want to be able to transition on our colors, and we're going to have a duration of 200 for our animation timing. And if the button is disabled, I want to change the cursor to the not allowed cursor. Also, if it's disabled, I want to set the opacity here to 50%. Make sure our text is white, and then finally put in all of these other classes. So we have our size classes, as well as our color classes, and then finally any custom class names that we need. There we go. So if I give that a quick save, you can already see that we have this giant button showing up. Right here and fill in the entire width. Now we don't want our button to quite look like that, so on this page we can come in here and we can pass in some custom class names. For example, on this one, I may want to make it so that it is going to be aligned, and actually I believe this is called self end inside of tailwind. There we go. So that's going to push that all the way to the end. And if we zoom out to a normal scale, you can kind of see what this looks like. And the next thing we can do is to work on our profile image. So let's create a component for that. Profile image.tsx, export function profile image. Let's return an h1 for now. Export, there we go. Make sure I import that in here. There we go. Now, of course, we know that this profile image needs to take in some specific classes. We're gonna have a source as well as any custom classes we wanna pass in as well. Profile image props. Type profile image props. Here we have our source, which is going to be a string, and also really importantly here, this can also be undefined or null. So we're essentially making this an optional property, because if we don't have an image, which is possible, we want to make sure we fall back to a default image. Then the next thing we can do is do our class name. That is going to be optional as well, and it's going to be a string. There we go. So now instead of our profile image, what we want to do is we want to check to see if we actually have the correct property. But before we do that, I actually want to wrap everything inside of a div that's going to give us essentially our normal default styling for how we want to round everything and so on, and then we can just plop in the image or our fallback value. So here for our div, let's give it a bunch of classes. We'll say class name here. We want it to be a relative position so we can absolutely position everything inside of it. We want to have a height here of 12 and a width of 12. Our overflow is going to be hidden, so we can make sure that all of our rounding actually takes effect. So we'll say rounded full to give us a circle, and then we'll pass in any custom class names that we need, just like that. Make sure that we actually properly do this. There we go. And then inside of here, we can do our check to see if our source is equal to null. If our source is equal to null, then we want to render our fallback value. Otherwise, we're going to render our actual value. So for now, the fallback is just going to be null, but otherwise, we're going to render out an image. And we can actually use the next image component for this. So let's make sure we give it all the properties it needs. For example, it needs a source, so we can give it our source right here. It also needs an alt, which is going to say profile image. And then we need to give it a quality, which in our case is going to be 100. We're saying essentially we want this to be 100% quality, don't downgrade it at all. And then if we say fill, it's going to fill the entirety of its parent, and we just need to make sure we give it a relative position for this fill to work properly. So now if we give this a quick save, we just need to make sure obviously that our URL is a correct URL. So inside of here, instead of passing along this fake URL, let's get that URL from our user. So we can say session equals use session, just like that. And if our session dot status is equal to, or sorry, not equal to authenticated, then we're just going to return. So for now, we're just going to do this, because essentially we're saying don't render this out. Obviously, because we aren't authenticated, so we can't create a new tweet. So now if we we get down to this point, our session.data.user we know exists because we are authenticated, so we're just going to get the image from them. So now if we save, you'll notice we're getting a different error. If I zoom this in, essentially it says hostname cdn.discord.app is not configured in your next config. So let's just copy this real quick, go over to our next config, which is all the way over here. We need to make sure that we put this inside of our hostname property. So we can
これ入ってんだ。じゃあ別にこれでもいいな。やらかしたな。
say that this is going to be for our CDN, I believe. Actually, it's called images. So we'll say images, domains, and then we want to specify that your
ついたよ。ちょっとね。
URL right there. And you can get that by just clicking on this link right here. Let's put a comment at the end of this, give this a quick save right here. And now, hopefully, if we refresh our page, we'll zoom to a more normal zoom level. You can see our profile image, whoops, was showing up right there.
お、見えた。見えます。
There. If I log back in, you'll see it'll show up.
Discord
You'll notice when we were logged out, this form didn't show up at all. But there you go. You can see the image showing up exactly as we would expect. Now, the next thing I want to work on is make it so that this input automatically sizes itself based on the content inside of it, because that's how Twitter works. So to do that, we first need to set our style here to a height of 0. That's just going to essentially remove all the height, which is what we want. And then we
どう考えても、スタイル崩れてる。
we want to automatically calculate that every single time that our text changes. So we can essentially hook up an on change as well as some state. So we can say const input value set input value equals use state with an empty string. There we go. So our value here is equal to that. And our on change, we're just going to say, whoops, set input value to e.target.value. There we go.
イベントのテキストエリアで。あ、そうか、オンチェンジ。チェンジか。チェンジでした。
So now, at least when I change things, it's properly hooked up, but of course I want to make it so that when I actually start changing the height, the actual input box changes as well. Now the easiest way to do this is actually, we're just going to create a function out here. It's called update text area height, or we'll call it size. This is going to take in a text area, which is optional, and we'll say HTML text area. There we go. The reason I'm making this optional is because when we call this, we may not actually have a text area. So if our text area is equal to null, then just don't do anything at all. But if we do have a text area, this is how easy it is to actually do this dynamic height. All we do is first set the actual height to 0. There we go. And this needs to be a string. Then what we can do is we can take our text area and we can specify that the height again is going to be equal to a string. This string is going to come from our text area, text area dot scroll height. And we can just add pixels onto the end of that, and that's going to give us
偽楽だよナイス三日坊主。
どうも、三日坊主です。三日坊主どころじゃないんです。
the exact
まあでも、やめてからどれぐらい経ったかは、あんまり関係ないんですかね。三日坊主。
size our text box needs to be.
1年間が空いても、 10年間が空いても多分3日坊主は3日坊主なんですよ。
to fit all of the text inside of it. That's how easy this is. It only takes a couple lines, but hooking that up inside of React is a little bit more complex. Now, the first thing you may think of is, okay, we just throw down a simple use effect, just like this, and this use effect is going to change on our input value, and we can just pass into here this function, and then we can get whatever our text area is, just like this. And that text area
明日も3日坊主だと思う。お願いします。あれ、こいつ、定義しない？
it can come from a reference. So we can say text area ref equals use ref. We know that this is going to be an HTML text area element. So we can pass in the current value just like that. And if we scroll all the way down here, we can set our ref like this. You may think that that's all
これで、画面が見えないんだよね。多分、出しても。そういいか入れた。プロジェクトにポストを HTML テキストエレメント。だるすぎる。いや、してませんか？あ、動くに動くか。これ多分。サイズしか書いてないから別に関係ない。
all that we need to do to make this work, but it's actually not quite that easy. Also, we need to make sure we set this to null like that. There we go. So now if we refresh our page, you'll notice it still doesn't have the correct size being set. It's not until I to make my first change to my actual input value that the size is being set. But when I do a first page refresh here, it's not being set. And there's a few reasons why that is. Now, the reason for this is because the first time our use effect runs, it doesn't actually have access to this reference yet because this reference hasn't been defined, so it doesn't know how to update the height. Also, this technically should be a use layout effect just because of the way that use layout effect works. We're changing the height of something, so it should be using use layout effect instead of use effect. But even if I give that a save and a refresh, you'll notice it still doesn't quite work as we expect it to. What we really need to do is we need to make sure that we run some code as soon as our text area gets added to the page. We can do this by using a reference as a callback. This is a bit confusing, but I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. We can just say use callback here, and this is going to call a function which is going to get our text area as the input into it. And we can call that function. So we can just call this function by passing it in that text area like that. There we go. And then we can make sure that we only ever call this use callback one time. Now this use callback, we're going to set to an input ref variable. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and set it as my ref here. So what this does is when you set a ref to essentially
読み込みが終わりません。そうなんです。ちょっとダメじゃん。OK。を使います。
A function like we've done here with our use callback, what it's going to do is it's going to call this use callback and it's going to pass the text area in as the actual property. So that means as soon as our text area gets added to the page, it's going to call this function and it's going to update that size. So we know that this is an HTML text area. There we go, just like that. And then all I need to do is just take my text area ref.current. I'm going to set it equal to my text area and then just
てかなんで先文字の更新やらない。
Just make sure we remove this dull from here so that we know that it is modifiable. So now if I give that a save and a refresh, you're going to notice my actual element has the correct height right when my page refreshes. If I change it and change it back, you can see that it's still automatically updating the height always. Now this still isn't quite perfect though. The actual output is perfect, but if we scroll up here, you're going to notice we actually get some errors. It's saying use layout effect is nothing on the server because it's essentially not ran. So try not to use this on the actual server. So what we can do is we can actually export, or we can actually create a new function. I'm going to call this one form. And inside of here, I'm just going to take all the code that I have in my new tweet form. I'm just going to copy all of this, paste it into there. There we go. So now essentially I've taken everything and put it inside this form component. And now we have our our new tweet form, and it's completely separate. And in here, I'm going to do a small check.
これは、なる。どこで作った気はしないでもない。やります。これ取れた。
I'm going to get our session. I'm going to check to see if our session is not authenticated, and I'm just going to return. Otherwise, I'm going to render out our form. By doing this one really small minor change, essentially what I've done is I've gone from actually rendering all the code inside of here, and I've said, okay, if I'm not authenticated, just don't render anything at all, so it never runs that, use LED effect on the server, which is great because we're never authenticated on the server. Also, the
別に出さなくていい。出す手が出ちゃう。
reason we're getting this error here is because this should return null and not undefined, and that'll clean up that error right there. Now we actually have this working. Let's just make it so we can actually create this tweet on the actual backend, so we can actually post it and create it and show this tweet on the page. So far we've done a lot of work and we don't have any interaction on our page yet. So the first step we need to do is actually give us a way to actually create this information on the server. So if we open our application up and we go over to the server section, you'll notice inside of API we have these routers. As you can see, we have an example router here. I'm just going to rename this example router to our tweet router, just like that. And instead of being called
ラウターのなんか変なの入ってるけど大丈夫？構成が違うんだ。 ちゃうんですよね。規定問題なんでしょう。逆にそっちの方が精度はいい。一つのファイル見ても。いいか。確かに。なんでその、どう考えてもおかしいな。普通に別に定義して、ここに突っ込めばいいだけな。どう入ってる中身はなんだけど、なんか、これ変えていい？ゲットオールないです。いいんだよね。
Example here, we'll call it tweet, just like that. Now we can essentially
ちょうど戻れない。3分前にしか戻れない。
remove all these different procedures. We don't need any of these. What we want to do is be able
ヘローだけ残して、ヘロ
to create our own procedures. So we're going to have a crate here, and this crate is going to be a protected procedure. That just means that you must be authenticated to do this. So to create a tweet, you need to be logged in. That makes sense.
A TRPC protected procedure is a custom procedure that typically includes authentication. Only authenticated users can access certain endpoints. Created way to protect your API routes from threat access. 別にいい。
And here we're going to do a mutation. The mutation allows us to modify data. This is going to be an async function, and this async function is going to take in our input, which is essentially going to be an object. We're just going to pass in some content, just like this. So instead of text here, we're going to call this content, and then afterwards we're going to have access to our context variable as well. This has things like our database as well as our user information inside of it.
こが迷うな。
There we go. Then in our root here, we need to make sure wherever we have this example, we change it to tweet, tweet, and tweet, just like.
授業を消す方法。ショートカット忘れました。コントロールシフト K。出ました。ありがとうございます。
Like that. There we go. That should hook everything up. And now we just need to make this actual mutation happen. So to do that, we can use Prisma, and Prisma can be accessed on our context by saying ctx.prisma and dot, and now we can access, for example, the tweet section. You'll notice our autocomplete doesn't have.
ここから違う。待て待て。出ません。db な。db.prisma。ドット。ないない。セッション。ボイスの取ってきてるやつが欲しい。とりあえず書くか。はい、欲しい。それミスった。
Have that information. If you run into this problem, then most likely what you need to do is you need to reload your TypeScript experience. So just say TypeScript restart TS server, hit enter, and now you can see that this is auto-completed. Properly. So anytime you modify Prisma, you may have to run that restart to get it to actually start working.
Prisma クライアントが使えるかな。
So now I can just call the create function here. This takes in some data, and the data has our content, which is what we care about. We also need to make sure we actually put in the user, so our user ID here, which is coming from our context dot, context dot session dot user dot ID. There we go. So that is going to be creating our user. This is an async.
PX を定義してないから、
synchronous function, so we need to make sure we await that, and we're just going to return the result of that back down to the server. Now you will notice we're getting an error. This error essentially says, oops, let me hover over this, unsafe return type of any. This is currently a bug from everything that I've been seeing that deals with Prisma, and it deals with ESLint for TypeScript, because obviously all of this stuff is properly typed based on Prisma. As you can see, it's properly returned to be all these different.
GTX が見えてないでしょ。見えてない。GTX、DB しかない。この方が悪い。変わった ?DB でもログとアダプターしかない。アダプターセッションユーザーエクスパイア。役に立ちそうなここしかないよ。DB のDB のアダプターでしょ。ませんけど。できない。はい。一緒。だ。OK。DX。これ、半年も経って、
different types, but it just doesn't know that it's returning all these types. So what we can do is we can modify this file right here to essentially ignore those things. So in this override section, we can just paste down some rules that are going to ignore some
ルールオフ。アサイメントと、詳しくない。これ動いてからじゃないと、
some of these unsafe things with any. I hate having this kind of information in there, but essentially this is a bug right now, so I'm just adding this in, and hopefully when you watch this video you won't run into these problems, or maybe I'm doing something wrong, and if so, let me know it down in the comments, but I had no idea how to fix this problem without just disabling these errors. So what we can do inside of here is we're just going to say we're going to set this to a variable tweet, just like that. And then we're just going to return tweet down here, just like that. It looks like even that isn't quite enough to get rid of all these errors. So I have a couple other ones that we need to do. We have no unsafe call and no unsafe return. That should hopefully fix those errors. And there we go, it did. Like I said, this seems to be a little bit of a bug with how Prisma.
この時点であった。いや、DB したとて、ツイートがさ、どこを参照してるかも。あれか、DB のあれか。名前ね。あ、じゃあ、これ普通に食べていい。こんな気がする。Very.
Prisma's generated as code and how ESLint is reading that. I'm not entirely sure why the issue is, but if you know more about it, please let me know down in the comments below. So with that done, we now actually have the ability to create tweets, which is great. So we can go over to this new tweet form and we can actually try to use that information, which is amazing. So down here, what we can do is we can say that we want to access our API. So we just say API. This comes from
Oops. 仕方がわかりません。
/utils/API, just like that. And we want to be able to access the tweet section, so we can say .tweet, and we want to be able to create a tweet. This is going to be a mutation, so we're going to use the use mutation hook, and we for now don't need to pass it any information. We can just say const create tweet is equal to that. Then we can actually create this tweet by hooking up an on submit event handler. So we can say handle submit.
API のツイートのクリエイトのユーズミューテーションね、よく言うんですか。クリエイト、API のツイートのツイートのクリエイト、ミューテーション。
Function handle submit that takes in a form event. and we can just say e.prevent default. There we go. Then we can call this create tweet function, passing it in our content, which is just our content from our page, which is our input value, just like that. And to actually call this, we need to make sure we call the mutate function. There we go. So now we can pass it our content just like that. There we go.
テキストだっけ？テキストでしょ。ミューテート。あれ？テキストってどこ？え？コンテントじゃない？はい。何のタイプにしてるんでしょうか？まあ、一回テキストにするか。どこなんですか？こいつか。
And that should actually create a tweet inside of our database for us, which is really great. And to test that, inside of here, we have an onSuccess function. And this onSuccess function will take in our tweet. We'll call it our new tweet. And I'm just going to console.log our new tweet so we can actually see if it is being created. Also inside of here, I'm probably going to set our input value to an empty string just to clear it out because that makes sense. Now let's inspect, get our console opened up, go over to our console here, make sure everything's cleared, type in some information, click tweet, and you'll notice that it actually sent that off. It got
違くね。リグレッシュ者です。ちょっと待って。ID。セレクトしてんだっけ。一瞬できてる。こんな感じなんだ。じゃあ見えないもしかして。もしかして、見えませんか？結構なことなんですよ。どこでもこれ入ってるんですかね。入れないんだ。これ、なくて。できる。セッションでなんか、異臭じゃないと思ったけど、まあ、俺はね、 うしてるけどなんか失敗したよ。どっか間違ってるんだよね。クエリは出るけど、何をするんでしょう。
The information back for us, and then down here you can see that I just created a tweet with
いや、絶対多分ね、これだと思ってる、普通に。いや、まずさ、普通にこれを出しゃいい。いいじゃん。してないサイト。してないサイト。してるな。そういう気がする。ここまで来てる気がするね。で、これが見えないんだよね。なんで叩く前の、どのタイミングでしょう。
with this content, the created at date, as well as our ID and our user ID. So So it is actually properly creating our information. Now we can go ahead and show it on the screen. So let's remove this console log for now since we don't need it. We're going to come back over to our actual page here. So if we open up our pages, go to our index page, we have our new tweet form showing up. It's saying that it cannot be used because it does potentially return undefined. Let's just make sure this says return null. There we go. That'll fix that error for us. And now below here, we can essentially render out all of the recent tweets. So we'll say recent tweets, close that off, and let's create. Create that function, recent tweets. Now this function itself is going to be rather straightforward. We're first going to get our tweets. I don't know how to do that yet, so we're just going to leave that as an empty array. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn a new component, and this new component is going to be a component we create. I'm going to call it infinite tweet list. And I'm breaking this into a component because we're going to be using this all over our application. So we have this infinite tweet list, which is obviously going to take in our tweets. So we'll say tweets is equal to tweets, just like that. It's just going to take in our array of tweets. And now we can create this. Component. So let's just copy that file name. .tsx, export function, there we go. We know for a fact it's going to take in tweets as one of its properties, and then we make sure that I spell infinite correctly. It looks like I spelled it wrong in all of those places, so there we go. That is now spelled correctly, and we can import this just like that. Now, the first thing I want to do is get our tweet information so we can actually start rendering it to the screen. The easiest way to do that is again going to be in our router. We need to have a way to get tweets, and we can access these tweets whether or not we are logged in. So we want to make sure that this is a public route for us. So we can call this infinite feed because we want to make sure that this is infinite scrolling. And again, I spelled infinite incorrectly. This is going to be a public procedure.
あ、別段間違ってそうだね。
procedure. And for our input here, we need to specify some objects that we're going to have. So our object here is going to have a few properties. The first is going to be a limit, which is going to be a number. And this is also going to be optional. So I'm going to make sure it's optional. And then we're going to pass in a thing called a cursor. That if you're not sure what a cursor is, I'll explain it in just a little bit, but it's how we're going to handle pagination. So we're going to make this an object, and it's going to be an ID that is a string, string, and it's going to also have a created at, which is also going to be a date, just like that. And this entire thing is going to be optional. If I give that a quick save, put a comma right there. There we go. You can now see that we have two properties here. We have a limit as well as our cursor for our pagination, which has an ID and a created at field, and both of these are optional. Then what we can do is we can say that we want to run a query. So we can want to get data is a query. This is going to take a function just like mutation. So I'm just going to copy this code right here. And inside of here, instead of a content, we're going to have a limit as well as a cursor. And both of these are going to be undefined to start. And our limit by default, we're just going to set to 10. Obviously, you would want to make this much larger if you're working inside of a real application, but to test pagination, we're making it quite small. So to make this query work, what we want to do is we want to get our context, we want to get Prisma, we want to get our tweets, and what I want to do is I want to call find many to get multiple tweets. And here's where all of our pagination is going to happen. So we're going to set our take property, that's how many we want to get. We're going to set it to our limit plus 1. And there's a reason we're doing that, and I'll explain it in just a second. then we have this thing called a cursor. So if our cursor is set, then what I want to do is I want to pass along our cursor. And we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So for now, I'll just say, ID, and we'll pass it in our cursor like this. Otherwise, we're going to pass in undefined here. Next thing that we want to do is to be able to select the things we want, as well as to set up our where clause. But most importantly, we need our order by. And here we're going to order by two different properties. First, we're going to order by our created at. We're going to put this in descending order so that we can order our tweets from newest to oldest. And then I'm also going to be ordering here by our ID. And I'll explain exactly why we're ordering by both of these in just a second, because you may think ordering by created at is enough, but it's actually not quite going to be enough. So the type of pagination that I'm doing is a little different than your normal pagination, where you essentially say, skip the first 50 results, because normally you would just say like skip page times your limit. This is how a normal pagination would work. You say, give me 10 items, and if I'm on page 3, skip the first 30 of them. In this case, we're using cursor-based pagination. So what you need to do is a cursor is essentially unique.
それでもマジでピンポイント。カーソルの位置で取ってくる。
Identifier, and every single element has some unique identifier to it, and these are going to be sequential. So for example, like IDs that go 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, those are unique, and what you do is you pass along the ID of the element you want to start with at. In our case, our cursor is where we want to start in the list, and then we're taking however many we want plus 1. The reason we're adding 1 to the end is because that'll give us the next item we start with, that last item, that 1 that we added. Now the thing that makes this a little bit more confusing is that created at is technically not unique. If two people post a tweet at the exact same millisecond, they're going to have the exact same created at time. And that's not ideal, and as you get a large social media application, it is possible that they would have multiple things created at the exact same time. So in our case, what we're doing is we're making a cursor a combination of our created at as well as our ID. Now the ID is only there in the cases where two created ats are created at the exact same time. So what we need to do is we need to say that our ID and created at are unique so we can actually make this work, and we need to modify Prisma to do that. So what we can do is we can go all the way up to our tweets, and we actually need to set up a uniqueness constraint.
Yeah, これが逆に問題説。いや、全部どうだと思うんですか？順関係あります。
Between our created at and our ID, and we're saying that every single tweet is going to have a unique created at and ID combination. And obviously that makes sense because every single ID is already unique on its own, so it doesn't matter even if all the created ats are exactly the same. So with that, we can actually come in here, npx prisma db push, that's going to allow us to actually use our cursor in this particular way. And make sure I did this correctly. Looks like I spelled Prisma wrong. There we go. Prisma DB push. That'll actually push those changes up to our development environment for us. And here it's just saying we're essentially adding a uniqueness constraint, and it's possible that there may be duplicates, but I know for a fact there are not. So now we can go back into here, and for our cursor, we have this thing here. If I just make sure I reset my TypeScript server, you'll see, give it a second here, created at ID. There we go. So this is a combination of our created at and ID. And we can pass them. In our cursor. Essentially it's saying give me an ID and give me a created at value. So again, to really explain what's going on, because I know this is really confusing, we're going to say, hey, give me the 10 most recent tweets. It'll run this query. Our cursor is blank to start, so it passes undefined, so we can ignore that, and our limit is 10, so it's going to give us the 11 most recent tweets. What we're going to do is we're going to return 10 of them, and then we're going to look at the 11th one, and we're going to get the created at date as well as the ID, and we're going to pass that down. And we're saying, hey, here's a unique ID and a unique created at time, and we're saying every single time you re-query this data to get the next 10 most recent tweets, start from this particular tweet. So we're just essentially giving us a start point. So we're ordering everything by created at, and then the only reason we have ID thrown in here is in the case where we accidentally have two things that have the exact same created at time, which is very unlikely, but it could happen if your application is quite large. This still may seem confusing, but as we actually implement it, I promise you it'll make so much more sense. So this is just for our pagination, so now we actually need to select everything we're going to do. By default, we don't even need to worry about a where clause because we want to just get all of the tweets that are recent, but we do only care about selecting certain things. For example, I want the ID of the tweet, I want the actual content of the tweet, I want the created at time for the tweet so I can display that. I also want to get certain count variables to determine, for example, how many likes the tweet has. So I want to select, for example, how many likes a tweet has, just like that. So I'm getting the count of the likes as well. Now another thing that's really interesting is I also want to get the information related to the user. So I can say user, and I want to select specific properties. For example, the name of the user, the ID of the user, and the image of the user. So I can make sure that I can actually show their profile. Show their name, and create a link to go to their profile. Now the final thing that's a little bit confusing is I want to determine, has this tweet been liked by this user yet or not? Because you can only like a tweet once, and I want to show you the tweets you have already liked. So to do that, we need to get the current user. So all the way up here, current user ID is just going to be our context.session.user.
CTX がどっちをこれセッションで取れるはず。これは取れるっていうことは多分、DB の可能性が高い。
And this
けど、高いが、ツイートがいない。普通にデータベースの れが出るのは違うかもしれない。いけた？いけそう。どうですか？ぽい。よりかに遅いだけ。
Could potentially be null because this is a public route, so you can access it even if you don't have an account at all. So here, if our current user ID is equal to null, well then what I want to do is just not get any information at all related to the likes because it doesn't matter. The person's not logged in, so obviously they've never liked anything. Otherwise, I only want to get the likes where the user ID is equal to my current user ID. So now if there are any likes being returned, that means the user has liked that.
これを今やれば取れるはずと信じていますが、なんかでもね、そもそもの変な読み込みがあるから、それがダメな気がする。普通にダメだと思う。普通に失敗したらですね。Use images remote configuration instead. 入ってないですね。入ってなくない。この外にパラメータ見える系ですか？クエリー、これ、セキュリティ的なあれで出さないと。普通におかしい。結局ダメなんだっけ？選びましょう。
A tweet. And we can just say that this is going to be equal to some tweets like that.
はい。疲れてる気がするんですけど。なんでしょう。そしてリターンしてないとか、ありますね。問題なさそうなんですが、この位置が違う。テンション。宣言して、なんですこれが入らないもん。ここが来ないもんだ。一瞬も来てない。ここのコンソールは画面に出たりしますか？先に叩きによくわかんない。これ確認が走るのかな？ 全然あり得るな。確認走っちゃうと。それは、動かしに行かない説ある。ちゃんと確認するのがいいのかなんですが、だるいんですけど。定義して。全部
Also, we should make sure we await this as well.
Await 消してない。Await してます。なんだかんだ Await で。
So now we have access to our tweets right here, which is going to be an array that has all the information for our user and
ちゃんと入ってる。ちゃんと見るようになった。
everything else that we selected. And we need to return that information to our user, so we can, return it like this. So now we have our tweets inside of an object. But we also need to give them the next cursor. Essentially, what is the next thing that you can do to do? Your search. So next time that we call this function, we can pass it along this cursor right here, and it'll start the query from where we left off. And using cursors instead of normal pagination will make sure that if people add new tweets as in between when we search, it's not going to mess up our search. So to get the cursor is quite straightforward. We're going to create a variable called next cursor, and we're going to specify this as a type of cursor. So it's just going to match the exact same type of our cursor, or it could be undefined, in which case, that's perfectly fine. And we're just going to leave it like that. Then what we can do is we can say if our data.length is greater than the limit. If that's the case, then that means, and we can call this tweets actually. There we go, tweets.length. Actually, let's just call it data. That's fine. There we go, data. What that means is essentially that we have gotten more data than we needed. We said limit +1, so if we asked for 10 things and we got there we go, tweet style length. Actually, let's just call it data. That's fine. There we go, data. What that means is essentially that we have gotten more data than we needed. We said limit +1, so if we asked for 10 things and we got back 11, well, that means that there are more things to get. So we have a next cursor. So let's actually set our next cursor. Next cursor, and here is going to be equal to an object. And to get the values for that object, we just want to get the next item. and that is just going to be equal to, whoops, I don't need that in an if, next item is equal to data.pop.
Oops. じゃあ言い過ぎなんだ。
Const next item, there we go. And if our next item is not equal to null, then we can set our next cursor equal to an object that is just queried from that data. So next item dot id, and our created at is our next item dot created at. There we go. So what this small little section right here is done is essentially saying, take the last element, remove it from our array. That's what pop does. It removes it from the array and then set that element's unique identifier as our next cursor. So when we next do this query, we start from this element right here and continue onwards instead of restarting from the start. Now what we can do is we can make sure that the tweets here that we're actually returning is going to be a slightly modified version of this data. Because this is a little bit tricky to work with, I'm just going to map it a little bit to make it a little bit easier to read the data and use it in our front end. So we'll say data.map for each tweet. We're going We're going to run through here and we return to it an object. So our tweet.id, our content is our tweet.content. A lot of this is going to keep the same. Our created at is our tweet.created at. Our like count is our tweet.like count. And actually this one's gonna be slightly different because we have underscore count dot likes. Our user here, user is just going to be equal to everything that is in our user. So I'm not even gonna modify that. We can actually just there we go, keep that like that. Then what we're going to do is our liked by me, this is the big one. We're going to take our tweet, we're going to check that likes array, and if the length of it is greater than 0, that means that you
それからいいねしたかどうか。そう。スペルです。
You have currently liked this tweet. So really, I've just massaged the data a little bit so it's a little bit easier to use in our front end. And now, speaking of the front end, we can actually use this in our front end. So if we go to this index page, here are tweets, we can get that from our API instead. So we can say API dot, and we want to be able to get some information from it. So let's make sure we import that dot tweet, and I want to get our infinite feed. And this is going to be using an infinite query. So we can say use infinite query just like this. Now for the parameters, we don't want to pass it anything, so we're going to give it an empty object because we don't have any input that we want to pass to it, because by default we're going to start with the starting page and a limit of 10 is perfectly fine. But we want to pass it another property here called get next page param. This is an option we can pass it. This is going to take in our last page. And then what we can do is we can just say our last page dot next cursor is going to be our next. Next page param. Parameter. So what this does is it essentially says, okay, whenever I want to get the next piece of data, use this next cursor and pass it up as our cursor inside of our TRPC query. So if we go back to here, this cursor property that we defined right here, that's going to be set to whatever we set to this right here. That's how that next cursor thing kind of works. Now for our tweets, we can just change this to say we want to get the data. And if we have some data, it's actually going to give us some pages. So we can take these pages, we can map through each one of these, and I'm actually going to do a flat map. So it's going to return to us a flattened array of data. And all I want to do is I just want to get the tweets from the page because I don't care about
出てこないんですが、僕もね、
the actual next data. Now, some other things I want to pass along here is if we have an error, I want to make sure that gets passed along. So that's just, there's error right here. Same thing for loading. I want to be able to display a loading state. So we'll pass that along.
どう違うの？
Along a has more state to make sure that if we have more, I want to be able to load that data. So if our tweet.has next page, that means that we have more information to load. And then for this, we can fetch some new tweets. That's going to be the function we call to get new data. And that just comes from tweets.fetch next page. Now,
fetch next page. Fetch next page. Fetch next page. こんなのありました？あるんですか？ This function allows you to fetch the next page of results. これ作ったっけって感じなんですか？ Infinite tweet list. JSX エレメント。JSX エレメントがいいね。ボイスを変えれば。変えてなー。 偉くて。
If we go over to this infinite list property here, we can make sure we have our tweets here, and we can say that this is going to be our infinite tweet list. There we go.
いや、出ません。ダメじゃん。あ、こいつ自身か。これ何？プロクシー。インフィニットツイスペスト。はい。
There you go. Props.
そうだよ。
Let's make sure up here we create a type. I'm going to create two types, one for a tweet and then one for our infinite list props. There we go. So we have is loading, which is a boolean. We have is error, which is a boolean. We have our as more, which is also a boolean. Our fetch new tweets. This is going to be a promise. And I really don't care what it returns, so we're just going to specify unknown because I don't know what it returns and I really don't care. And then our tweets is an optional tweet array, just like that, because we may not have any tweets to start with. Then what we can do is we can specify our tweet. So here we have an ID, content, created at, which is going to be a date, like count is a number, liked by me, which is a boolean, and then finally our user, which is an ID of string, an image, which is a string or it can be null,
ID。
And then we're going to have a name, which is also a string, or it can be null as well. So then down here, let's just get our information. We have is error, is loading, fetch new tweets.
It's very resistant.
And then as more, that's the last one. There we go. And then we can just have some simple checks. If, for example, we are in the loading state, then we're just going to return an H1 that says loading, and we'll replace that with a loading. Spinner a little bit later. Is error is going to be the same thing, but it'll just say error. For us. And then if our tweets equals null, well then for now we'll just return null. This just is going to protect us. In case for some reason our tweets doesn't exist. And the next thing I want to do is if our tweets.length is equal to 0, and actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a question mark inside of here, and let's just do tweets equals null, or our tweets length equals 0. There we go. Here I'm going to do a return that's just going to say, hey, you have no tweets. So we'll come in here with an H2 class name. We're going to put a bottom margin on it. We're going to center our text. We're going to make it quite large so it's very easy to see, and we're going to make it a gray color, and we'll just say no tweets. There we go. So this essentially covers all of our potential error use cases. And then below that, we can actually render out what our actual page is going to look like, which is just going to be a UL. Now to handle the infinite scrolling, there's a lot of ways you can do it, but by By far the easiest way to do it is just to use a library. So I'm going to install a library called React Infinite Scroll Component, and that's going to handle all of the difficult work that comes with infinite scrolling for us. Let's get our application rerunning again. There we go. And then inside of here, I can use that infinite scroll component. We'll just say infinite scroll, just like that. There we go. Let's make sure I import that. So now it's importing itself up here. We have our infinite scroll. We just need to pass it all of our information. First of all, if we come in here, we need to pass it the length of our data. Well, that is just our tweets dot length. There we go. Then next thing we need to pass is we need to pass it our next, and this is just a function it calls to get our next piece of data. We need to pass it a has more property. Well, we already have that, so let's just come in here with a has more. There we go, super straightforward. And then we have some type of loader.
Straightforward.
And in our case, we're just going to do the text of loading for now, but we're going to replace this with a loading spinner in the future. Now the final thing we need to do is actually put what we're going to do to render our tweets. So for now, I'm just going to map through each one of our tweets. I'm going to return a div that has a key, which is tweet.id, and I'll do our tweet.content. So hopefully, if we've done
でした。
everything correctly, we should actually see it show up on the side. And I just need to make sure I place a return statement here. There we go. There we go. And as you can see, we have the text for that one tweet. And if I create